Day 869 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 556,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,030 in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, 9 tanks, 23 APVs, and a whopping 48 artillery. Plus 2 air defense systems, and I'll show you those in a moment. But first to the map. As we saw that a test flight of a Russian Sukhoi Superjet 100 reportedly crashed near Kolomona in Moscow. And this is likely to be part of Russia's new aviation manufacturing that might have some issues getting off the ground with the technical complexity involved with such an industry. Then to the Kharkiv-Belgorod border within Ukraine, as Vovchansk has shown some marginal gains for Ukraine, or as far as this map is concerned, or it's better to say marginal area of control losses for the Russian side. And I'll just go back on the map and I'll show you what that looks like. So there was yesterday, then of course we move across to today. As Russian positions were pushed back about a block in central Vovchansk and about a block as well in the east, further eroding Russia's connection to the aggregate plant as well. And then the same can also be said for part of next door's contact point, as the AFU pushed Russian positions back to the lake at Helaboka, which is somewhat impressively northeast of the settlement itself, with Ukraine in the space of less than a week, I would say. Yep, there we go. So 6 days ago, dramatically pushing the forces back in this region. And although I say Russia, it's better to say many mercenaries from Africa who have been fed into this location by the truckload to help Russia fulfill its own self-created problematic status quo. And that is of requiring constant influxes of meat-wave infantry manpower to try to advance with, or in this case, to attempt to defend with. So Russia has to keep up this tactic as best they can, which is a clear marker of desperation and not a sustainable approach long term, even when taking into consideration foreign contractor additions. Then headed all the way down to the Avdiivka axis, as Russian forces expanded their bridgehead positions just beyond Novoalexandrivka. So we'll zoom right in there, though it could be characterized as more of a horizontal expansion on either side of the river, and that can be shown with the date map. And in fact, it will be key for the Russian forces to expand to the west side of the river to bypass all those water bodies, all in their never-ending quest to reach and control the highway utilized by the AFU. Then, quite recently for the map, the Ukrainian forces reportedly struck a Russian airfield outside of Mariupol, which is reportedly the location of an S-300 air defense battery. Ukraine is clearly not stopping until they destroy every last one of these in or near to occupied Ukrainian lands, which is definitively in part due to a shaping operation for paving the way for F-16s. Then, on the topic of Russian air defense losses, we saw the Ukrainian 14th Regiment against a Russian Tor air defense system. Firstly, we see the failed attempts of the Russian Tor air defense system to shoot down the Ukrainian reconnaissance drone, which was acting as a marksman for an impending HIMARS strike, which proceeded to take out the Russian system. And the location of this event was 45 kilometers or nearly 30 miles from the front lines, directly east of occupied Donetsk city. So as impressive as this HIMARS strike was, give a round of applause to the recon drone that travelled so deeply into Russian-held territory undetected. Then also in the east, we saw the destruction of a Russian Tiger M, the infantry mobility vehicle sporting some type of anti-drone cope cage, which, lo and behold, did not help. Then also, we got a more recent up-to-date insight with some shots of the road into Kharkiv, littered with destroyed Russian vehicles, most of which are the non-military Buhanka Scooby-Doo vans that should almost become the Russian army's mascot at this stage. Forget the double-headed eagle. Then onto some news and taking a look at yesterday's events at the NATO summit in Washington, as we saw the Biden administration announce a new $225 million military aid package for Ukraine. The package, confirmed by the Pentagon, includes a Patriot battery, which we already expected based on other adjacent announcements, ammunition for NASAMS air defense systems, Stinger anti-aircraft missiles, HIMARS ammunition, TOW anti-tank guided missiles, anti-tank Javelin and AT-4 weapons, plus various ammunition calibers. Kyiv and Washington also signed a statement of intent on co-production of weapons inside of Ukraine. And also at the summit, there was the general consensus expressed of, for instance, to quote new British Defence Secretary John Healey, "If Putin prevails in Ukraine, he's not going to stop there." Also, Kaja Kallas, the PM of Estonia, stated that the war in Ukraine and NATO's response to it also determines whether NATO is credible or not. And so the outcomes from this year's summit include a pledge from all 32 allies to increase defense industrial production and to coordinate with fellow NATO countries on national plans to strengthen industrial capacity. And this was exemplified through many countries' announcements of commitments over the two-day summit, including Portugal, who allocated 220 million euros in military assistance for Ukraine, and Norway, who's funding a tenfold increase in ammo production for Ukraine as well. Then Sweden joins the coalition of drones for Ukraine, and Denmark will sponsor the production of 18 Ukrainian howitzers, the Bodanas. Even friend of NATO, Australia, showed up to the summit, announcing $250 million in military support for Ukraine. So the summit was a reaffirming of commitments all around that demonstrates NATO's unified stance and measures taken to respond to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, emphasizing the alliance's commitment to upholding democracy, international law, and the principles of national sovereignty and territorial integrity. Then to some more news, US intelligence agencies uncovered a Russian-linked plot to assassinate Armin Papperger, CEO of German arms manufacturer Rheinmetall. The US shared this intelligence with German authorities who successfully protected Papperger and thwarted the plot. Rheinmetall, of course, supplies weapons and equipment to Ukraine, including Leopard tanks, mortar and artillery shells, and drone surveillance systems, with also the company opening one plant in Ukraine and plans to establish at least 3 more. So this incident, along with reports of a Russian-linked arson plot targeting US military bases in Europe, has raised concerns about the escalating nature of Russian operations. Some officials argue that these activities may exceed the traditional definition of hybrid operations, thus potentially crossing the threshold into armed conflict. NATO addressed this issue in a declaration during its Washington summit, stating that hybrid operations against allies could be considered an armed attack, potentially invoking Article 5. Of course, with Article 5 of the NATO treaty stating that an armed attack against one or more NATO members is considered an attack against all members, obligating each member to take action to restore and maintain security. See, it's all about the definition of the wording of armed attack in this case. But ultimately, the alliance's response to such activities would depend on Russia's future actions. Then onto some more NATO-related news of the moment. China has strongly denied NATO's accusation that it is a quote-unquote decisive enabler of Russia's war against Ukraine. This response came after NATO General Secretary Jens Stoltenberg stated on July 10 that all alliance members agreed on China's role in supporting Russia's invasion. That's quite a big statement. A spokesperson for China's mission to the EU dismissed NATO's declaration as filled with Cold War mentality and belligerent rhetoric. Sounds like China is describing Russia there. Calling the accusations, quote, provocative with obvious lies and smears. China maintains it has never provided lethal weapons to either side of the conflict and exercises strict control over dual-use goods exports. However, NATO leaders point to China's boundless partnership with Moscow and its extensive support for Russia's defense industrial base. Not to mention how these Chinese denials completely fly in the face of the no-limits partnership that Russia and China always seem to be expressing in the last decade or so. But with China currently facing significant economic problems internally, on a whole laundry list of economic metrics that they attempt to hide, the country is still very reliant on trade with the West. So this dependency means China will have to tread very carefully in its international relations and not be seen to be supportive of Russian aggression. Or they can just lie about it. But as for my little op-ed nugget, I always get the feeling that China's partial support of Russia is not to wear down Western military readiness and capabilities, but rather to wear down Russian military readiness and capabilities, all to get a slice of that Russian land and Arctic resource exposure. Because Russia and China, these types of countries can be nations of political backstabbers, not able to put together a truly unified front like the West. Instead, it's more of an act of a unified front until it no longer serves its purpose for one of the countries. More of a friendship of convenience. Then headed across to another Russian military mobilization blunder segment as Russian Telegram channel named Mobilizatsiya, which is Russian for mobilization, has shown that Russians started putting QR codes with links to the army recruitment center on utility bills in Khabarovsk, which is in Russia's far, far east. So you get a utility bill and at the same time an invitation to go and roll the dice in Ukraine if you're struggling to pay your electricity bills. Seems like a very Russian way to advertise. Then headed across to a quick funny to round it all off for today, guys. After what appears to be Russia running out of even the Chinese golf carts to send the meat waves in, as some mobilized Russians are now making their own assault golf carts, probably with a lot of discarded pieces they've found laying around the Donbass. So straight out of Mad Max, except less impressive looking. Yep, just 2 years ago, Russia was considered the second strongest military in the world, and yet today they sometimes can't even live up to Mad Max levels of automotive quality. Russia just cannot afford a professional army. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like and comment. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!